Hello, everyone. We're beginning this sixth webinar of the Smart City Training Series. Today, the topic is on cybersecurity. Thank you all the participants for joining us today. And welcome if it's the first of the webinar where you're participating, or happy to see you again for all the ones that have already been following the other webinars. So today, it's on cybersecurity. As usual, I will make a little bit of introduction about the Global Center. We are the UNDP Global Center for Technology, Innovation and Sustainable Development, based in Singapore. As a global center in UNDP, what we do is to support with our country offices, governments in the use of the technology and innovation to achieve sustainable development goals. We basically work on three focus areas: sustainable agriculture, smart cities and digitalization, and sustainable finance. And among the different services and support that we provide with the country offices, we are doing this webinar series on smart city related topics, which can be related to digital technologies, but also other topics that are relevant in smart cities, such as mobility, circular economy, gender, etc. So as many of you might know, UNDP has developed the UNDP Digital Strategy precisely to support the different governments in the use of digital technology for the achievement of sustainable development goals. But this strategy also includes an internal transformation. And linked to this strategy, we're also developing this UNDP Data Principles strategy. So here you can see the principles, but soon you will also be able to access the whole strategy on data principles. The digital strategy is already online available. As part of this UNDP digital strategy implementation, we are also supporting this CDO in the implementation of some digital readiness assessment, so quick surveys in countries to understand at which point of the digital transformation pathway they are in right now. And among the different elements that we analyze and that we see that there's a growing interest is cybersecurity. So that's why we decided to invite to this webinar some experts on cybersecurity that have also been doing like some assessments across the world to help governments to identify which are the best policies to implement on that matter, to understand a bit more which are the different elements related to cybersecurity, the policies, and which are the things that need the more attention from the part of the governments. So without no further delay, I would like to introduce to you our speakers. Thank you very much for joining us. Caroline Weiser from the Global Cybersecurity Capacity Center that will be presenting the Cybersecurity Capacity Maturity Model with all the dimensions that they consider in cybersecurity. And afterwards, we will have Dr. James Boardman from the Oceania Cybersecurity Center presenting some use cases in the Pacific Islands. So thank you very much all for joining us today, and I leave the floor to Caroline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alba. I'm going to share my slides. One second. Yeah, very warm welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are right now. My name is Caroline Weiser-Harris, and I do start with the PowerPoint presentation, and then I will hand over to my colleague James from the Oceania Center. I'm based in Oxford and James is based in Melbourne. So we come from two directions geographically right now, and very happy to be in this webinar. Yeah, so I will start this presentation just with a short introduction to who we are. Then I will give an introduction to the CMM, the Cybersecurity Capacity Maturity Model for nations, and how it is deployed. And then James will focus on like how the CMM assessments have impacted national cybersecurity capacity building activity and investment, and will provide case studies from the Pacific. So why is cybersecurity important, and why is it also in particular important for achieving the SDGs and also the drive for innovation? This is really important, in particular in the context of the Global Center in Singapore, but we are working very closely with development partners because, yeah, as you know, ICT and internet-based services are really ingrained in all the SDGs. And just to give you some examples, SDGs can be facilitative participation in economic processes, important to build trust in internet-based services. So cybersecurity is really crucial to for these elements. ICT provide access to health services, and of course, individuals' data and personal information needs to be protected. And of course, also cybersecurity is crucial for the resilience of the health services provided. Not only talking about like really complex health services in more developed countries, but also like if you think about like really like mobile health services that are provided. Cybersecurity is also important in terms of protecting vulnerable groups, women, youth, but also others who are new coming online, are very new to be online and use those services to help to protect them against any kind of discrimination online. I mentioned already critical infrastructures are really crucial. And of course, education becomes more and more important, and people using those need to have the adequate skills and the awareness of the risk which comes with that. And of course, cybersecurity correlates with GDP. That's one of the outcomes from our research, and is a potential for driver for innovation. So we technologies like AI, Internet of Things, identity management, all these services coming into play, they have to have the right secure cybersecurity. Otherwise, there are a lot of risks that can cause harm. We're doing also research on cyber harm and look what could be the impact. And of course, are a threat to development processes. So I think there's now a tendency also in the community that cybersecurity really has to be mainstreamed in development activities and investment. So now just really quick about us. We are a center based at the University of Oxford. Not anymore in this nice building on the left-hand side. This is the Oxford Martin School. We are a program of that. But we are in a multidisciplinary project. And based at the computer science department, where we have our relationships across the university and different other departments. And we work very closely with experts from other stakeholder groups, international organizations, government, civil society, who we work together. And for our research, we get input from them, but we also work very closely when it comes to doing this national assessments. So what we are looking into is to find out what works and what doesn't work and what makes cybersecurity capacity building effective. And of course, our ideas or our aim is to increase the scale, pace, quality, and impact of cybersecurity capacity building globally. So since 2017, we are not, it's not only us, but the idea is also to establish, was very early to establish also a global constellation of cybersecurity capacity research centers. Our first partner is Melbourne. James will tell a bit more about this in a minute. And then since last year, we also have a partner center in Cape Town at the University of Cape Town. We call it CSA or C3SA, the Cybersecurity Capacity Center for Southern Africa. The focus of those two centers is to basically deploy the CMM in those regions and do those assessments, working closely with governments, develop regional informed research into cybersecurity capacity building, and also feed that regional informed research into this global research project. So we work very closely to develop global data set, but also like acknowledging that different countries, different regions have very different requirements. So yeah, and they also work as the entry point for capacity building activities, as the CMM assessments are often a way like to initiate NCS, national cybersecurity strategy processes, or are the beginning of a bigger investment. But I get to that in a second. We aim to have other partnerships across the world. We work, but we're on the Western Hemisphere. We work very closely with the Organization of American States, and we're also looking for partners in the Asia region. So that's the Cybersecurity Capacity Maturity Model for Nations. I would like to stay a little bit on that slide. We call it the CMM. It was developed in a consultation process with experts from around the world. And the idea is to look really holistically at cybersecurity capacity. It's not a technical issue, it's a human thing to cybersecurity. And it involves a lot of different kind of areas. We have split into dimensions. That's a concept which existed before, but we kind of used it to build a model, a framework to assess national cybersecurity capacity. So these 5 dimensions you can see on the lines are very interrelated, very correlated. So you can't just pick one area, but like ideally you look at it from this very broad view, and you can also like see like how one thing informs the other. The first dimension is the cybersecurity policy and strategy. This looks in areas such as cybersecurity strategy, national strategy, crisis management, incident response, critical infrastructure protection, also cyber defense in the sense like, are there any capabilities in the country? So that's more like some of you may think, okay, that's cybersecurity beside the technical issue, but I think that's where one of the focus areas is of our research. Then there's a second dimension, which really comes from the user perspective. What does cybersecurity do? Users, so does a government, does the private sector has a cybersecurity mindset? Are they aware of like the risks that exist in cyberspace? Do users, governments know how to protect personal information online? Is there any reporting about cybersecurity incidents, but also how to protect yourself on the media? Is there much what is like the cybersecurity mindset in a country from like across like whole society? And do people like know how to protect themselves? I go a little bit further detailed into that one in the next stage. The other dimension is dimension 3, which looks at like the maybe something else, something also you may come across is cybersecurity awareness raising. Like you're talking about coordinated activities to raise awareness about cybersecurity risks. This often comes from financial services. As a client or customer of financial services, you may know this, maybe some campaigns from your personal experience, or internet service providers sometimes do activities, but also like the governments are often involved to really do campaigns, offline and online campaigns to increase the awareness. But this dimension also looks at training, education. So is there any kind of cybersecurity education in the primary or secondary schools? Are there any degrees or courses offered in cybersecurity at universities or other higher education institutions? Are there any training opportunities to receive training from private suppliers or through universities or other institutions? And like, is there any research on cybersecurity taking place in the country? So really this really goes into the details of that. Then there's dimension 4, which is the legal regulatory framework. So what kind of legislation exists? Is there any legislation to prosecute cybercrime cases? Is there actually capacity in the courts or in the law enforcement to actually go after certain cybercrime cases? And last but not least, it's more like a technical dimension. Standards and technologies looks at like, are there any what kind of standards are implemented? What are there any cybersecurity requirements in procurement processes? It's also about responsible disclosure. Is there a market for cybersecurity insurance, etc.? So this makes the model. It's quite comprehensive. Just go to one of the slides, because so you can see that from that chart that each of these dimensions has different factors. These are like, in this case, cybersecurity, national cybersecurity strategies, national defense, and then each of these factors again has different kind of, we call them aspects, and for each of these aspects there's a set of indicators across along 5 stages of maturity. So like, and then each of these stages has maybe 1 to 2 to up to 6 indicators. So overall, it's, when you look at these dimensions here, you can imagine I think we have about almost 800 indicators for the whole model. So it's quite a comprehensive document. It's publicly available. We're gonna add the link and provide you the link later. Just to tell a little bit more about dimension 1, you can see here, I touched a little bit in the previous slide, but for instance, here you can see there's national cybersecurity strategy, but we're not only asking like, okay, is there a strategy, yes or no, but we actually look at like who was involved in the strategy development. Was it inclusive? Did different stakeholders like private sector were able to contribute and comment on the strategy? Were there consultations taking place, and the ability to reflect on it and to contribute to strategy development? Does the content reflect all the crucial issues which have to be in the national cybersecurity strategy? For instance, also, are they assigned any responsibilities? So who's actually relevant for the implementation? And then also looking like how this implemented, are there any kind of review processes taking place? So often there's a strategy, it's finalized, it's launched, everyone was happy, but then actually there's no follow-up on the implementation. And the last but not least thing in this factor, for instance, is international engagement. Like how the country actually engages in the global cyber policy debates. Are they involved in the UN working groups? Are they kind of have abilities and channels to contribute to these discussions? So you see, like that's a very comprehensive model. I don't want to go too much in detail because then you can't really see. You can see the indicators and everything in the document we'll show later, but it gives you an understanding how holistic and how to be approached. Here's, for instance, I kind of already touched a little bit, is the dimension 2, cybersecurity culture and society. Let's look at the, for instance, cybersecurity mindset. Are people actually aware of the risks that exist? Do they know how to understand like what things could happen if they click on a certain link, or they just open an email and they don't know the person who's behind, like they don't know who sent this email, they just click on the link. Do they put priority on security? For instance, when this comes to governments, do they really see it as a crucial issue that it's really tackled from top? And what are the practices? So it's a really, really detailed model. And what we do, and we find out that's why it's a little bit different to how other partners are doing, is that we actually don't do a desk workshop only, that's one of the preparation, but we actually are invited by governments to do these assessments. And a research team either from Oxford or from Melbourne or from Cape Town or from our other partners actually are going to the country. And what we do, we also always coordinate it with other implementers and the partners when we do these assessments. So and how we do that, we organize, to call it focus, as strictly seen from a research perspective, methodology perspective, we do modified focus group discussions with key stakeholders. So we go there and have organized 10 sessions over 3 to 4 days. We work very closely with the government to organize this, to identify the key stakeholders. We do desktop research, and at the end, and that's one of the core outputs, at the end we draft a report which gives you information about where the government information about where the country is in terms of maturity per factor. So remember, we have dimension 1, we have the factor national cybersecurity strategy, and then there are recommendations for each for what needs to be done to get to the next stage of maturity, to meet the next indicators. These are the stakeholders we're talking to. So we really try to talk to like a broad range of experts in the country. So sometimes I think in some countries you talk to up to 100 people, like individuals, and we always bring together different stakeholders in one session. So let's say we have people from the Ministry of Education with people from civil society, and then we discuss issues around cybersecurity mindset. Or we talk about like, are they involved in this in any kind of like, what is the status of the education and across all levels of education. And so at the end, we get a really good picture, and we always try to cover each dimension at least 2 or 3 times in different sessions. We get a really good understanding where they are. So, and it's a very open, interactive process. We always do it on a Chatham House rule, so people can share information and allows us to get as much information to actually come up with a stage of maturity as a review. Wait, quick, before I hand over to James, what is the outputs or benefits of the strategy is that we facilitate direct conversation with stakeholders in the country. It's a nationally owned process supported by neutral external evaluation. It's a kind of a self-assisted self-assessment. We do qualitative and quantitative benchmarking, and we produce a report with coordinated recommendations to guide investment priorities. So we have done these, not we, like we and our partners. So those you see in the bottom, our regional partner, but we will also work closely with others, such as World Bank and the Organization of American States. We work with CTO, ITU is a close partner of us. And we have altogether, we have done over 85 CMM reviews around the world. And yeah, we keep on doing CMMs. We started second CMM, so that's actually the most interesting to see like how a country progressed over a period of between 3 to 5 years. Yeah, just to mention our partners, very important for us, very important for the success of this project. And yeah, some of them also do CMM assessment and then we do the quality check. With no further comments, because I think I'm already over my time, I hand over to James, and then at the end we are both open for questions. James, please go ahead. And let me know when I should check the slides.
Thank you, Caro, and thank you to Elba and the team for inviting me to join you all today. So I'm James and I work for the Oceania Cybersecurity Centre, or OCSC, and we're a not-for-profit based in Melbourne, Australia, and we're funded by the Victorian Government. The OCSC is formed by these 8 universities here on the right, giving us access to over 120 cybersecurity researchers with expertise across policy and strategy, human factors and culture, awareness, education and training, law, regulation and online safety, and incident response, technical controls and standards. So you can see how the CMM fits our organisation quite well. As a member of the constellation of capacity centres, as Caro said, our focus is on the Oceania region and deploying the CMM in the Oceania region. And so far we've had the honour of working with Samoa, Tonga, Vanuatu, PNG, Kiribati, Federated States of Micronesia, and recently Tuvalu. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what is cybersecurity maturity for a nation? Is it about regulation and compliance? Well, we know that a tick in the box to achieve compliance doesn't mean that we're mature. Is it about AI and machine learning? There's no product or service to make us secure, whatever secure means. Is it about doing what country A does? Well, from our research, we can't point to any country who's got it all worked out. Or is it about resilience? I'd argue that nothing is ever going to be truly 100% secure. No matter what we plan for, the unexpected will happen. Resilience is our goal. This is a definition of resilience from US Homeland Security that I like because it talks about what and not how. Here we see that resilience is the ability to adapt to changing conditions and prepare for, withstand and rapidly recover from disruption. So this is hard and it's multidimensional. So we can think of cybersecurity maturity as a journey with many steps along the way. You can travel forward and backwards, but resilience is the ultimate goal. Next slide, please. So where to begin? Well, we argue that the first step is to understand where you are now, and that's exactly what the CMM does. It helps you to understand where you are on the maturity journey and plan the next steps. Next slide, please. In 2020, so last year, an independent evaluation of the CMM's impact with countries who've undergone reviews found that the CMM review process is driving increased cybersecurity awareness and capacity building and contributing to greater collaboration within government. It's helping to enable networking and collaboration with business and wider society, enhancing internal credibility of the cybersecurity agenda within governments, helping to define roles and responsibilities within governments, increasing funding for cybersecurity capacity building, and finally, it's foundational to countries' strategy and policy development. Next slide, please. So the CMM review reports are always owned by the country, and it's up to the country if it wishes to publish the report, a section of the report, or keep the whole report confidential. The reports provide an executive summary and a summary graph of the assessment, supported with around 80 pages of detailed discussion of the baseline of where the country is now, and specific recommendations for next steps to build capacity and raise maturity across all factors of the CMM. However, it's up to the country to decide the priorities for the desired future state and how it wishes to get there. It's expected that the recommendations will help to guide these decisions. Samoa was our first review conducted with a team from Oxford in 2018 on a joint mission with the International Telecommunications Union, ITU, and the Asia Pacific Network Information Centre, APNIC. Here, the ITU conducted a detailed assessment of the requirements for a national cert, and APNIC provided technical training to defenders and local IT professionals while we conducted a CMM review. Samoa chose to publish their report after all recommendations were accepted by their cabinet at the end of 2018, with Samoa keen to be seen as a leader in cybersecurity and digital transformation in the region. Some key findings from that report include Samoa were at the early stage in their cybersecurity journey. For example, although the national strategy was published in 2016, there hadn't been much progress. In terms of incident response, the government were developing or starting to develop incident response capability, and the CERT was yet to form. There was no list of CI assets or critical infrastructure assets. Awareness activities were limited and ad hoc, with no national awareness programs in place. Professional training opportunities were limited, and there was no cybersecurity specific legislation and no legislation or regulation covering data protection. And finally, there was no specific standard in use or coordination of IT across government. Fast forward to now, Samoa have continued to work on the recommendations from the 2018 report and have gained support from the Australian government to progress the formation of SAM-CERT. The CERT will coordinate national level incident response and join the regional CERT community PAX-ON to exchange knowledge and information. Samoa has also established a program of awareness activities across the private sector and within schools, and the Ministry of Communications and Information Technology has started to share community information with stakeholders via its website, social media channels, and email alerts. Samoa has also partnered with the not-for-profit GateSafe Online to establish a website with a series of localised awareness resources. The government are working to engage the public further through face-to-face community-based activities across the different villages in the islands, and working with GetSafe Online, they've established an ambassador program of local volunteers to continue to build capacity around awareness. The government's been working with a number of implementers from the international capacity building community to provide professional training and build local technical capacity to detect and respond to incidents. New cybercrime legislation is under development, which will inform data protection and cybersecurity policies in coordination with SAM-CERT. And finally, in terms of standards use, the government are conducting a review of current agency practice and looking to improve coordination and standardization across government. We recently completed data collection for the CMM review of Tuvalu. So the review is not yet complete and not public. However, the reason I've included Tuvalu as a case here is just to talk briefly about the process, as this was our first review to be conducted in the region during the pandemic. Tuvalu has a vision to actively participate in the global digital economy, not just consuming content, but also creating it in the form of digital goods and services. A holistic approach to strengthening national cybersecurity is therefore foundational to this digital transformation, and we were invited to work with the government of Tuvalu to conduct a remote CMM review, enabling Tuvalu to understand where they are now on the cybersecurity maturity journey and inform the next steps. Conducting the review remotely during the pandemic enabled the team to work with Tuvalu at least 12 months earlier than expected and engage with more than 30 decision makers and technical personnel. As Tuvalu is currently COVID-free, the locally hosted focus group discussions were face-to-face, with OCSC joining via secure video conferencing. This enabled the focus group participants to be able to step away from their desks or day jobs and have time to benefit from the opportunity to network and discuss strengths, challenges, priorities and opportunities within the different focus group sessions, but importantly, have follow-up conversations with other participants over coffee or lunch. This is a common example we see of capacity building happening by just bringing people together in the room. Next slide, please. Some summary observations from the region include: nations are very aware of the areas they need to focus on. There's a lot of positive collaboration that's happening within the national and regional context. In the national context, different government agencies are working together across government, working with the local critical infrastructure operators and working closely with the community. Examples include the development of national certs and the community activities to raise awareness and increase safety online, with a priority given to the safety of children. At the regional level, there's collaboration, for example, in developing cybercrime legislation, building incident response capability, threat intelligence sharing, and sharing of lessons learned. The main challenges we hear are resourcing, so having enough trained staff, equipment, and tools with funding that isn't just for a project, but is sufficient to build capacity and then sustain that capability into the future. Next slide, please. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Caroline, for very comprehensive presentations today. And it's really important cybersecurity, of course, that countries around the world having to adopt some virtual or cyber measures during the COVID-19 and recovering from it. We have a couple of questions, although we have only 10 minutes left. So the first question goes back to Caroline. I think when you mentioned the 5 dimensions, the first question is about, can you provide some examples of countries that have excelled in dimension number 1, strategy, and maybe dimension number 2, cybersecurity culture, as well as the dimension number 4, which was around regulatory framework development and enforcement. So if you could address that question, both of you, that would be great. Maybe we can go back to the slide with dimensions as well.
Thank you. That's a good question. So, I mean, you can access some of the reports, by the way, online on our website. We will share the resources later. I think I mentioned it earlier. There is a correlation between GDP and cybersecurity capacity. So saying that many of those countries who, like the more developed or the industry countries or the countries in like with a higher GDP, often also have higher capacity in are more mature in those dimensions that you mentioned. I think there are only few countries and it's very difficult, maybe not, and even like the most developed countries don't have are not on the highest stage, on the dynamic stage. I think, just as an example, I think the UK and Switzerland, I think in some areas they're actually on the dynamic stage or strategic. But it doesn't, on the other hand, it doesn't mean that if a country is very developed, they really excel in all the areas. So all of them have their areas for improvement and where they have to improve, have to build capacity. But Jenny's saying is that, of course, if a country has a strategy and has a national cert which is functioning, and makes sure that the strategy is implemented, then often also the maturity stage in other dimensions, or maturity stage in other dimensions, other factors of those dimensions are often better. As I said, like all interrelated. So there is, for instance, there's an ongoing research. So what I'm saying now is all things that we are finding out that if a country has a strategy, then often also dimension 3 is a bit higher, or because then they're probably more in a better position to provide cybersecurity education, and also when it comes to legal frameworks, etc. But I must also say that there's no one size fits all, right? So countries have different approaches to build other, and I think, and James just touched it a little bit, and maybe you can say something about it as well, that countries have different priorities. You know, some countries where you want to become like a regional leader in a certain area, some countries focus on a certain industry. So they have different priorities that also then reflect in the maturity stages. I mean, and also like regarding dimension 2, cybersecurity culture, that's also something which is very influenced by the local culture. There's interestingly, that's also one finding from the research, there's interestingly not so much like that all regions are very defining, like what region is very similar, countries in one region are very similar in terms of maturity, but often cybersecurity mindset is really determined also by the local culture. I know, James, do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Carrie. I was just going to add on to what Carrie said in terms of one of the main differences between what the CMM is and other instruments out there for looking at maturity is that we're looking at cases. So we're not comparing country 1 to country 2 and saying country 1 is better than country 2. We're looking at a case study. So we're interested in what's best for that country that we're studying. So the priority for the country that's been assessed might be to stand up a national cert. It could be to start up a particular awareness program, and that might be the priority for their national strategy. So it's really about what's the best thing for that country and what they would like to do. And it's also about the resources and the local context. So if you are in a smaller economy, you might not necessarily have the resources to do the kind of things that a bigger economy can, but that doesn't mean you can't have an impact. It just means that your priority and your approach is different.
Thanks very much. Just follow-up question on that. When you go do the reviews for 85 plus countries, do you go back and say, okay, we're going to do a progress report? Have you done any of that? Or if you've done it, what were the challenges that you have observed them not really progressing in terms of the dimensions?
So yeah, so we do go back. We always keep our relationship with the country, and we follow up, and we do. I mentioned earlier, I think we also have done already a couple of reassessments, and the Organization of American States did just a second regional study last year. The challenges are the implementation and the funding, I think, and also prioritizing. I think that's something where our partners and also James can talk more about, because that's the Oceana Center and the Center in Cape Town also have the mandate to go, then also help countries to implement some of the recommendations, whereas we in Oxford, we just do the assessment and the research. But our partners like World Bank, ITU, etc., they actually help to prioritize, because that often seems to be the biggest challenge. And then also like to prioritize which of the many recommendations of the report should be implemented first. And funding is often a problem. That's why such institutions like the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, which acts as like a match clearinghouse and also helps with identifying potential funders. But that seems to be a challenge. And often, though the CMM itself is already a sign of political will, it could be sometimes also the political will, the high, really on the senior level, there's a priority on cybersecurity. That's often also a challenge. James, you would like to add something to that?
Thanks, Carrie. Yes, so the way that we see the next step after the CMM, so the CMM is this first analysis of where are you now, and then we'll make several recommendations. So looking at the next bit about putting those into a priority and what you would like to work on, that's another conversation that happens after the CMM. and that takes account of other national priorities and the resources that are available. So that's a continuing conversation, and we are very supportive and will always stand with the country we deliver a report to work with them on that discussion of where they'd like to go next, and help them approach donors or funders to look at funding those activities, and partner with other implementers to deliver the capacity building that the country wants.
Thanks for that answers, James and Caroline. There were a couple of questions in the chat, as you can see, going back to the dimensions. If you could briefly discuss dimensions number 2 and 3, how we can evaluate the impacts of these measures taken on these dimensions, as well as dimension number 5, which organ in the government can support in these elements. So it's really about going back to the 5 different dimensions we talked about,
Caroline. James, do you want to take 3, 4, and 5, and I do 2 and 3? So the impact of measures in dimension 2 is indeed something which is sometimes a bit difficult, because because that you can do just through surveys. What is actually, or like customer surveys. You can also through interviews you can identify, like, okay, like, do people actually understand what the risks are? We don't do this, but that's something what could be done to assess, like, do people actually aware of the risks? Do they know how to protect themselves? I guess there are some, I'm sure the private sector does assessment in this regard. Like, you should not click on a link that's sent by for other person, or do they know actually who to call if they are victim to, for instance, to cyberbullying or to cybercrime? Do they know who to report to? So these would be like measures which could be taken from these kind of areas. In terms of dimension 3, that's something that you can, there are different ways to look at the really like impact, like, are there any courses offered? Are there any graduates in cybersecurity, for instance, from to have done the degree in cybersecurity, or have done completed courses in cybersecurity strategy? How many people actually received a training on certain issue or received a certification? How many research papers, for instance, when it comes to research and development, like how many research papers, academic research papers, but also other papers were published? These could be measures. It could be measures to look at the impact of those areas. James, do you have any other ideas regarding the other 2?
Thanks, Carrie. So in terms of dimension 4, looking at the legislative framework, you could look at things like how's the legislative framework align with international agreements such as the Budapest Convention, or the Convention on Cybercrime. And in dimension 5, which is looking at standards and technical controls, you can look at the adoption for the regulation and the adoption of technical controls in different sectors, so in critical infrastructure, in the private sector, in the public sector. Has there been the adoption of international standards, and are organisations being required to adopt a minimum level of technical controls to protect the information that they store and process?
Thank you for that. Yeah, I remember you mentioned that political will was very important in making really meaningful progress towards these dimensions, as well as other aspects. And you talked about different indicators, 800 plus or so. And we had comments in the chat, how can we get involved, and how are you planning to do the assessment during pandemic environment, all of this. I think, James, you mentioned one of your assessments, there was no community transmission, so that helped you do make the process a bit smoother in terms of planning stakeholder meetings and so on. And as Caroline mentioned, we have I think the CMM model itself is publicly available. I think when we are going to send you the follow-up email, we are going to include that information as well as further readings that both of our speakers have shared with us, and the slides. There is just a question that I think a person meant to send it to everyone, but it is arriving in my direct message. Haitham Kwoki asked, what is the difference between CMM framework and the Global Cybersecurity and the Index GCI published by ITU? Okay, I think that's the last question that we're gonna tackle today, if you wanna take that one.
Hi, yes, so briefly, the ITU index is comparing countries. And so in order to compare countries, one of the things that they do is they collect information from the countries which is submitted to the ITU by country representatives, and the ITU do a lot of quality evaluation of the data that they get. So they check it against things like, it could be a CMM report, it could be other sources to validate the information that they get. And then they provide a profile of that country compared to other countries. And we've actually I think we've got an expert on the line from the ITU who'd be able to give you more detail on their approach than myself. Whereas the difference, the main difference with the CMM is that we go to the countries, we do extensive desk research, but we also go to the countries that have these focus groups. So we collect data in country by talking to several representatives of different sectors, and we use that data to inform our case analysis of the particular country, as opposed to comparing countries.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think we have somebody from ITU in the audience who just raised his hand. I think I'll just give him a chance to ask if he had any question. Just gonna unmute.
Hi, everyone. Am I audible? Yes, I guess.
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to clarify, maybe James, how I explained the GCI is we compare them. Actually, we don't compare them. We just look at the countries, their commitments. So we measure the commitments of the countries, but eventually, when they get put into this basically rankings and so on, they get compared. But in principle, different country has different priorities. But when it comes to this questionnaire, we monitor the commitments of the countries to see how committed they are to cybersecurity. And in principle, that's what it is. It looks more into validating the data, what countries say they're doing, but we are not checking the quality. So that's why the CMM and GCI are complementary to each other, where CMM goes more into depth of seeing, the things which country says is doing, what kind of quality is offering, and what kind of efficiency it has on national level. So I think there is a complementary, and I think more and more we are getting aligned and working together on using the GCI data to shorten the time of the desk research. So that's our aim, where we are reaching out with different partners working on CMM. Over from my side, and thank you very much for the time given. Over.
Thank you very much, Arhan, for that clarification. And both of the frameworks are complementary, as you said, and thanks, James, for addressing that question as well. So as Liz just shared in the chat, the CMM 2021 edition is available to download from that link. I think that's the end of our session today. This was the webinar number 6 of our Smart Cities Training Series 2021. Thanks everyone, thanks James and Carolyn, everyone who participated. And please go ahead to the form that I just shared on the feedback survey. It takes only 2 minutes. It just serves to make our webinars and training series better. And thanks everyone for your time, and especially our speakers. If there's anything else you want to mention, that's of course you can contact James and Carolyn directly if you have any more questions regarding the CMMM or cybersecurity issues. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day,
everyone.
please.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.